On the night of December 12, 2079, General Jung Sung-hwa, Chief of Staff of the Republic of Korea Army, sat in his office. Outside, a cold winter wind was blowing across Seoul, and the nation was still unable to recover from the shock of President Park Chung-hee's assassination. A four-star general rested on his shoulders, the highest position in the Republic of Korea Army, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers moved at his single command. He was the pillar supporting this country's military. However, that night, someone came to blow up that pillar. Gunshots rang out. Armed troops surrounded the Chief of Staff's quarters. They were not enemy soldiers. They were soldiers of the Republic of Korea, and the person who issued that order was Major General Chun Doo-han, the commander of the Buin Command, who was a subordinate of Jung Sung-hwa. In terms of rank, he was far behind. In terms of authority, he was in a position where he dared not lay a hand on the Chief of Staff. Yet, that night, he did. Jung Sung-hwa was arrested. A four-star general had to surrender to his own subordinate before the muzzle of a gun in the middle of his country's capital. This was the very beginning of the event that history calls the December 12th military coup. And this was the moment when the life of a man named Jung Sung-hwa began to completely crumble. You are about to hear that story. Please stay with me until the end to see how a man's life was shattered overnight, from a four-star general to a private, from the highest-ranking leader of the Republic of Korea military to a criminal unable to even properly wear his uniform, and how a massive figure was hidden behind that shattered life. This is not a story of a simple military coup. It is a story about loyalty and betrayal, honor, and how long truth can be trampled upon. People often imagine the moment power collapses as dramatic. Defeat on the battlefield, public execution, or standing proudly before the judgment seat of history. However, the downfall of General Jung Sung-hwa was far more pathetic and far more brutal than that. At 7:30 p.m. on the night of December 12, 1979, Jung Sung-hwa was already on the move. He had already secured the support of key combat units, including the Capital Security Command, the 1st Special Forces Airborne Brigade, and the Reconnaissance Special Forces Brigade. This was not an impromptu rebellion, it was a meticulously planned operation to seize power. While Chung Sung-hwa was having dinner at Samcheongbong in Ga that evening, Jeon-duen's troops were already on the move. The Ministry of National Defense, Army headquarters, and even Chung Sung-hwa's personal quarters were all targets for siege. Armed troops stormed the dinner table, causing chaos and arrests. At the time, an actual shootout broke out between Chung Sung-hwa's security forces and Jeon-duen's troops. People died. Soldiers of the same country were pointing guns at each other in the heart of Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea. Consider just how abnormal this situation was. At the moment the nation's chain of command completely collapsed, Chung Sung-hwa was taken away as a powerful figure. His name was no longer in his office. The generals who had received his orders now began to look toward Jeon-duen. There is a saying that power comes from loyalty. That night, those words literally became reality. However, the real cruelty began afterward. Had it ended with an arrest, history might have been recorded differently. Jeon-duen did not stop there. He resolved to completely destroy Jung Sung-hwa. A military court, fabricated charges, and a history of setting precedent by demoting a four-star general to the rank of private. There was no precedent in the history of the South Korean military for an active duty chief of staff to be arrested by a subordinate and demoted to private. It was unprecedented, and it was something that should never happen again. Yet, it happened. and for a very long time, it was packaged in official history as a just measure. Jung Sung-hwa. He was born in 1929 in Hapcheon, Gyeongsangnam-do. When he was born, Joseon was already a Japanese colony. His childhood was an era of oppression and humiliation. However, that era was also one in which the desire to reclaim the country burned most fiercely. After liberation, the young Jung chose the path of a military officer. Having enlisted in the army, which was established alongside the founding of the Republic of Korea, he soon faced the harsh reality that was upon him. On June 25, 1950, when the Korean War broke out, he was 21 years old. The Korean War tempered Jung Sung-hwa. It was not merely training. On the actual battlefield, facing real death, he learned the true essence of being a soldier. He learned how to accept the falling of his comrades and how not to crumble even in the face of enemy gunfire. By the time the war ended, he was already making a name for himself as an outstanding field commander. His military career spanning decades can be summarized in a single phrase: an honest and principled soldier. He prioritized competence and principles over political alignment. Even under the Park Chung-hee regime and amidst the complex power struggles within the military, he lived by his own way. That was the power that propelled him to high positions, and at the same time, it was the cause that later brought him down. In 1979, he finally ascended to the position of Chief of Staff of the Army, the supreme leader of the Republic of Korea Army. It was the moment when decades of hard work bore fruit. His family rejoiced, and junior officers looked upon him with respect. He was now the face of the nation's military. However, less than a year after assuming the position, the country began to turn upside down. On October 26, 1979, President Park Chung-hee fell to a gunshot fired by a close aide. With the sudden end of 18 years of iron-fisted rule, the Republic of Korea instantly plunged into a power vacuum. And within that vacuum, an ambitious man began to slowly make his move. Chun Doo-on. He was the commander of the Security Command. Upon his appointment as the head of the Joint Investigation Headquarters for the Park Chung-hee assassination, he had already squandered immense government power and authority. And his eyes were set on Chung Sung-hwa. Did Chung Sung-hwa know this? Looking back on those days, he must have certainly detected warning signs that Chun Doo-on was acting beyond the bounds of investigative authority, that there were abnormal movements within the military. Yet, he trusted in principles. He trusted the military chain of command. He likely never believed that a subordinate would dare to challenge him. That belief was his greatest tragedy. On October 26, 1979, at 7:41 p.m., 6 gunshots rang out at the Gungjong-dong Safe House in Seoul, and President Park Chung-hee collapsed. The shooter was none other than Kim Jae-gyu, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. It had been 18 years of Park Chung-hee ruling this country with an iron fist. Those 18 years ended in a mere few seconds. At that moment, the Republic of Korea stood on the brink of history. Jung Sung-hwan was at the safe house with him that night. He heard the gunshots. Amidst the chaos, he confirmed that the president had fallen. He immediately contacted the military police and initiated emergency response measures, including declaring martial law. He had only one thought in his mind: he had to stabilize the nation. However, this very moment was an opportunity for Chun Doo-on. Chun Doo-on was the head of the Joint Investigation Headquarters in charge of the Park Chung-hee assassination case. This was not merely a simple investigative task. This position was where all intelligence was concentrated. He held in his hands everything: who was where on the day of the incident, who was in contact with whom, and what movements were taking place within the military. And he did not use that information solely for the investigation. The reason Chun Doo-hwan set his sights on Jung Sung-hwa was simple. As long as Jung Sung-hwa was alive, the military's legitimate chain of command remained valid. A coup was impossible without eliminating Jung Sung-hwa. Therefore, Chun Doo-hwan began constructing a scenario to link Jung Sung-hwa to the Park Chung-hee assassination plot. What was Jung Sung-hwa doing around this time, amidst the baseless accusation that he had colluded with Kim Jae-gyu beforehand? He genuinely intended to protect the country. His goal was to stabilize the system of presidential authority under Cho Kyu, minimize military intervention in politics, and prepare for the transition to a civilian government. He was a soldier, and he believed that a soldier's role was national security, not politics. That belief was noble. However, reality was harsh. While he was discussing principles, Jae-on-deun was mobilizing troops. While he was dreaming of a democratic transition, Jae-on-deun was preparing a coup. History is often most cruel to the good. Sung Eo's story is proof of that cruelty. From October 26 to December 12, about 47 days. That was the time given to Jung Sung-eo. After 47 days, his world would come to a complete end. Did he know it? We cannot know. But what is clear is that during those 47 days, he did the best he could. And to understand Jung Sung-hwa that even that was not enough, one must understand Jae-on-deun. Light shines only when there is darkness, and the tragedy that befell Jung Sung-hwa was made possible because the figure of Jae-on-deun existed. Jae-on-deun was born in 1931 in Hapcheon, Gyeongsangnam-do. Interestingly, he hails from the same Hapcheon, Gyeongsangnam-do, as Jung Sung-hwa. Born in the same land, wearing the same military uniform, the two became completely different human beings. Jae-on-deun is a graduate of the 11th class of the Korea Military Academy. He was evaluated as possessing exceptional tactical talent as a soldier. However, what characterized him even more was not his tactical prowess, but his talent for manipulating people. He mastered human desires. He knew who wanted what, who harbored grievances, and who had weaknesses, and he exploited them precisely. His core network was Hana. It was a secret organization of officers from the Korea Military Academy. On the surface, it appeared to be a social gathering, but in reality, it was a thoroughly factional organization. Members of Hana supported one another and helped with each other's promotions. This was an unofficial power structure within the military, and Chun Doo-hwan stood at its center. Jung Sung-hwan was wary of Hana. He believed that private organizations within the military blurred the military chain of command. He sought to dismantle Hana. That was another reason. On December 12, the day the rebels had to eliminate Jae-on-deun's political life, Jae-on-deun's movements resembled a military operation. Pre-recruitment, simultaneous troop movements, communications chiefs, and the suppression of key figures, he did not hesitate. He did not stop, even when gunfire broke out. He continued even as people died. This was the very essence of the man named Chun Doo-hwan. A person who could cross any line for the sake of his goal. Immediately after the coup succeeded, Chun Doo-hwan volunteered to serve as acting chief of staff of the army. It was completely illegal, both legally and procedurally. Yet, no one could stop him. The law remained silent in the face of a coup. In 1980, Chun Doo-hwan became president. And in the process, hundreds of citizens died in Gwangju. However, what we must focus on today is not that grand history. It is the story of Jung Sung-hwa, the first victim of that history. Where was Jung Sung-hwa while Chun Doo-hwan rose to the pinnacle of power? What kind of suffering did he endure? And how did he endure that suffering? The charges leveled against the arrested Jung Sung-hwa were as follows. aiding and abetting the assassination of President Park Chung-hee. That he knew in advance or condoned Kim Jae-gyu's assassination of the president. And that he resisted arrest by mobilizing troops. Let us examine these charges one by one. First, the charge of aiding and abetting assassination. Jung Sung-won was at a safe house on the day of the assassination. This is a fact. But can that serve as evidence of conspiracy? Several high-ranking officials were present at the safe house at the time. Were they all conspirators? Throughout decades of research and trials that followed, not a single piece of evidence emerged proving that Jung Sung-won knew about the assassination in advance. Not a single one. Next is the charge of resistance. It is true that Jung Sung-won's security forces fired shots at troops within Jeondeun. However, consider this. Is it a crime for a security detail to defend itself when armed troops storm in the middle of the night? Is protecting a general in a trench illegal? In fact, within the chain of command, Jeondeun's actions were completely illegal. Yet, the military court was under Jeondeun's control. The trial was a rigged affair. The conclusion was already predetermined. In 1980, Jung Sung-won was found guilty and demoted. From general to private, it was an unprecedented event in the constitutional history of the Republic of Korea. 4 stars, decades of dedication, everything built amidst the shelling of the Korean War, it was erased in an instant. What must have been the expression on Jung Sung-won's face on the day he received the notice of demotion? Records are scarce. However, his memoirs contain this passage. I did not cry. I could not cry, because it was too absurd. Quote. This single sentence captures the sentiment of the church at the time better than anything else. He took off his military uniform. His medals vanished. His name was erased or distorted in official records. His family suffered social stigma. His children heard the harassing of money collectors at school. His wife had to hang her head in the market. Jung Sung-won's downfall was not his alone, it was the downfall of an entire family. He was under surveillance for years to come. The Jeondeun regime did not kill him quietly. They chose a method even more cruel than killing him. To reduce him to nothing while he was still alive. To show the world that a 4-star general was reduced to a private. This was Jeondeun's method. To show everyone that this is the fate of one who challenges authority. But history is long, and the truth enjoys life. Jung Sung-won was alive, and as long as he is alive, the story does not end. In May 1980, not long after Jung Sung-won was convicted in a military court and lost everything, the most tragic event in history erupted in Gwangju, a city in southern South Korea. Chun Doo-won's new military regime, presided over by the May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement, extended martial law nationwide. The citizens of Gwangju took to the streets, demanding democracy. Chun Doo-won's response was the airborne forces. The airborne troops opened fire on the citizens. Students died. Women died. The elderly died. The official death toll stands at 165. However, many historians say the actual number of victims is likely much higher. Where did Jung Sung-won witness all of this? He was under surveillance. He had no voice. He did not wear a military uniform. He was a nobody. Officially. But imagine what must have been happening inside him. The military to which he had dedicated his life was aiming its guns at the citizens of his own country. The concept of national security, which he believed he had to protect, was being used to massacre the people. And the person who gave the order was his subordinate, Jeondeun. This was Jung Sung-hwa's deepest wound. If I had worn the 4-star general's rank, could I have stopped this? That question must have tormented him for the rest of his life. The answer is unknown. However, the weight of the question itself transcends imagination. The bloodshed in Gwangju is not merely the history of the democratization movement. It was the direct result of the December 12th rebellion. If Jung Sung-hwa had not been arrested, if Jae-on-dun had not seized power, Gwangju would have been different. It is said that there are no hypotheticals in history. However, this hypothetical scenario cast a shadow over Jung Sung-hwa's life all too clearly and painfully. The Jae-on-dun regime called Gwangju a riot. Official textbooks taught it that way as well. Those who spoke the truth were arrested. The media remained silent. And the first stone that made all these lies possible was the arrest of Jung Sung-hwa on the night of December 12, 1979. The downfall of a general led to a massacre in a city. This is the link in history. This is why we must remember the story of Jung Sung-hwa. The Jae-on-dun regime lasted from 1980 to 1988. 8 years. For Jung Sung-hwa, it was 8 years of darkness. Officially, he was a private. But in reality, he was a stranger figure than that. A man erased from society. Under the Jae-on-dun regime, Jung Sung-hwa's name was taboo. Speaking in his defense was dangerous. Those who were close to him distanced themselves one by one. That is always the case for those who can sniff out power. Let me tell you the most shocking fact. During this period, Jung wrote articles asserting his innocence. He wrote a memoir. However, publication was impossible. Publishers refused. Out of fear. His voice was thoroughly blocked. He was alive, but he could not speak. He existed, yet it was as if he did not exist. His economic hardship was also severe. Along with his demotion, most of his military pension was taken away. There was virtually no compensation for decades of military service. His family suffered financial hardship. Separately, the general's family found themselves in a position where they had to worry about their livelihood. This was yet another act of violence inflicted upon Jung Sung-hwa by the Jae-on-dun regime. However, Jung Sung-hwa did not collapse. At least not completely. That is what is surprising. He quietly recorded his thoughts. He quietly prepared his testimony. He waited for the day when the truth would be revealed. Like a survivor of the shelling of the Korean War, he knew how to act. Although he was a tiny minority around him, there were people who knew the truth. Those who were present at the scene on December 12th. Those who had witnessed firsthand just how illegal Jae-on-dun's orders were. They could not easily step forward. As long as Jae-on-dun was alive and held power. But their memories were not erased. And those memories would later change history. In 1987, a massive wind of change blew across South Korea. During the June Democratic Uprising, millions of citizens took to the streets, and the Jae-on-dun regime accepted a constitutional amendment for direct presidential elections. Democracy was returning. And along with democracy, the truth also began to return. In 1988, Jae-on-dun left the Blue House. The Roh Tae-woo administration began. It was not complete democratization, but it was a spur-of-the-moment era. Jung Sung-hwa was finally able to speak. The 8 years of silence were broken. In 1993, President Kim Young-sam of the civilian government took office. He was the first true civilian president in South Korean history in 32 years, and immediately after his inauguration, Kim Young-sam declared, "Setting history straight." These three phrases changed Jung Sung-hwa's life. The prosecution began a reinvestigation into the December 12 incident and the May 8 incident. Initially, a decision of no grounds for prosecution was issued. The logic was that a successful coup d'état could not be punished. The entire nation was turned upside down. Citizens were enraged. The bereaved families of Gwangju wept. And eventually, the prosecution decided to re-indict. In 1996, Jeon Duan and Ro Tae-woo stood in court. The charges were a coup, insurrection, and bribery. This was not a simple criminal trial, it was a trial of history. It was one of the most dramatic courtroom scenes in the modern history of South Korea. Chun Do-won remained expressionless in court. He justified his actions, claiming they were for the country. However, testimonies poured in. Those who were present at the scene on December 12 spoke up. They revealed just how illegal, violent, and meticulously planned the arrest of Jung Sung-ho had been. Jung Soo was a key figure in this trial. He stood in court, speaking out in an official setting for the first time in decades. His testimony was composed, yet within that composure lay decades of anger and sorrow. There were people in the audience wiping away tears. The trial result was shocking. In a positive sense, the Supreme Court sentenced Jeon Duan to life imprisonment in 1997. The crime of insurrection was officially defined as a military rebellion on December 12, and the suppression of the May 18 uprising as an insurrection. The South Korean judiciary assigned these official names to history. Furthermore, the verdict against Jung Sung-hwa was overturned. His guilty verdict was null and void. It was confirmed that all charges leveled against him were fabricated. By defining December 12 as an illegal military rebellion, the court acknowledged that Jung Sung-hwa's arrest itself was illegal. However, we must stop here. What did the court's ruling return to Jung Sung-hwa? The years lost, the trampled honor, the suffering endured by his family. The law can speak the truth, but it cannot turn back time. Jung Sung-hwa received honorary posthumous authority in 1996. His rank as a general was officially restored. From private to general. However, it was a restoration on paper. He was already 67 years old. He was no longer old enough to wear a military uniform, nor was there a place for him to wear his stars again. Jeon Duan received his third promotion in 1997. It was a decision made by President Kim Young-sam, under the pretext of national unity. This pardon remains controversial to this day. Jung Sung-hwa publicly expressed his outrage regarding this pardon, stating that a pardon cannot erase the truth of history. He was right, and those words became one of his final public messages. On January 12, 2002, Jung Sung-hwa passed away at the age of 72. He did not see complete justice. Jeon Duan was alive. Having received a pardon, he was spending a peaceful old age at his home in Yeondong, Seoul. The victims of Gwangju were still waiting for a full investigation into the truth. It was said that history had been set right, but the reality was far more complex than that. Many people attended Jung Sung-hwa's funeral. Comrades who remembered him, those who fought for his rehabilitation, and the younger generation who learned his story belatedly. The insignia of a general was placed on the coffin. 4 stars. It was what the court had returned. However, in a true sense, those stars had never once left him. Looking back on his life, this question comes to mind. Did Jung Sung-won live a failed life? On the surface, it might appear that way. He was dragged from the highest position overnight, convicted on fabricated charges, demoted to private, and spent over 8 years in social oblivion. The coup he tried to stop succeeded, and the democracy he sought to protect was trampled upon. However, let us look at it from a different angle. Jae Do-eun stood in court. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. December 12th was officially recorded as a military coup. May 18th was recognized as a democratization movement. Jung Sung-won's guilty verdict was nullified. His rank was restored. And history clearly tells us who was right. Here, let me tell you one of the most shocking facts. Chun Doo-ah died in November 2021. He did not apologize for the Gwangju massacre until his middle age. He closed his eyes believing, without a single word, that he was right. On the other hand, Jung Sung-won spent his entire life quietly proving why he was not wrong. The verdict of history is clear. The one who committed insubordination went to prison, while the one trampled by it was reinstated. Though late, history eventually found its rightful place. What does Jung Sung-won's story leave us with? It is not merely a military lesson. It is a story about how lonely and costly it is to uphold principles. It is a story about the immense courage required to refuse to bow before power. And it is a story about how truth, no matter how long it is suppressed, will eventually burst forth. A 4-star general became a private, and then became a 4-star general again. That journey consumed his entire life. But at the end of it all, history says, Jung Sung-won was right. And that is enough.